The sky above Prime had not been blue for 17 days. Smoke and ash from the orbital strikes turned everything an orange. The beautiful crystal towers that once made the capital city famous across the galaxy were now broken ruins. Fires burned everywhere. The sound of explosions had become so common that the people below no longer flinched when they heard them. Deep beneath the burning city, in a bunker carved from solid rock, Governor stood before a wall of screens. His 4 arms hung at his sides, 2 of them bandaged from an injury he had received during the first attack. His large silver eyes, which had once shown kindness and wisdom, now looked empty and tired. He had not slept in 6 days. The screens showed what remained of his world's defenses. The answer was simple: nothing. The Dominion fleet had destroyed every satellite, every defense station, every ship that tried to escape. 43 warships surrounded his planet like hungry predators circling wounded prey. They had complete control of space. They could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and there was nothing anyone on Prime could do to stop them. A young aide named walked up to him. She was barely an adult by standards, her purple skin still smooth and unmarked by age. She held a data tablet in her trembling hands. "Governor," she said softly, "they have sent another message." Did not look at her. "What do they want?" "Unconditional surrender. They say if we open the bunker doors and come out, they will spare the children." "They are lying." "Yes, Governor, I know." Everyone knew. They did not spare anyone. They had conquered dozens of worlds, and the stories from those places were all the same. They took what they wanted: resources, technology, slaves. Whatever they did not want, they destroyed. There would be no mercy for Prime. Finally turned to look at, "Has there been any response to our distress signal?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "The Coalition received our message. They sent a reply 3 days ago. And the nearest fleet is at station. They said they will come as fast as they can." "How long?" His voice became a whisper. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, closed his eyes and let that number sink into his hearts. They would begin their ground invasion within hours. His people would be dead or enslaved long before any help could arrive. The distress signal, the desperate hope that someone would come, had been for nothing. In another part of the bunker, far from the command center, thousands of refugees huddled together in the darkness. The underground shelters had been built to hold 10,000 people for a few days during natural disasters. Now they held over 50,000, and they had been there for more than 2 weeks. The air was thick and stale. Clean water was running low. Medicine was almost gone. A young woman named Sola sat against a cold stone wall, holding her younger brother in her arms. Was only 12 years old. A piece of falling debris had broken his leg during the first day of attacks, and without proper medical care, the wound had become infected. His skin, which should have been a healthy purple, had turned. His breathing was shallow and fast. He was dying, and Sola knew it. Sola whispered, his voice weak, "Is help coming?" Sola looked down at her brother's face. She wanted to lie to him. She wanted to tell him that everything would be fine, that ships were on their way, that he would see doctors and get better and grow up to be the scientist he always dreamed of being. But she could not make the words come out. "I do not know," she said honestly, "but I will not leave you. Whatever happens, I will be right here." Nodded weakly and closed his eyes. Sola held him and tried not to cry. Around them, other refugees talked in quiet, desperate voices. Some prayed to old gods that they had for thousands of years. Others argued about whether surrender was better than fighting. A few sat in complete silence, staring at nothing, their minds already broken by fear and loss. Above the planet, in the massive command ship of the fleet, War Admiral reviewed his invasion plans. He was enormous even by standards, 3 meters tall, with thick armor-like skin and 6 red eyes that seemed to glow with cruel intelligence. His species had evolved on a harsh, violent world, and they had carried that violence to every corner of the galaxy they touched. Had conquered 17 worlds in his career, he had personally killed millions. He felt nothing when he thought about the cowering beneath him. They were weak. They were soft. They had built beautiful towers and created art and music, and none of it would save them. In the universe that knew only strength mattered. "War Admiral," one of his officers said, "ground forces are ready. We can begin the invasion at dawn." Smiled, showing rows of sharp black teeth. "Good. I want the capital taken by midday. Kill anyone who resists. The rest will be sorted for labor camps." "Yes, War Admiral." Turned back to the viewport and looked down at the burning planet. Another easy victory. Another world to add to the Dominion's empire. He felt nothing but satisfaction. In the bunker below, Governor gave the order to distribute the last of the weapons to anyone who could fight. It would not be enough. Nothing would be enough. But they would not simply walk to their deaths. They would resist. They would make the pay for every meter of ground. That night, as the hours before dawn slowly passed, something happened that no one on Prime or in the fleet expected. At the very edge of the star system, far from the planet and the ships, space itself seemed to tear open. A flash of light brighter than a star appeared for just a moment, and then it was gone. In its place was a ship. It was not a ship, it was not a coalition ship, and it was definitely not. The ship was human. It was alone, and it was heading straight toward Prime. The ship was called It was a heavy cruiser of the Terran Republic Navy, built 40 years ago during the bloody border wars that had nearly destroyed humanity before they even reached the stars. The ship had been rebuilt 7 times. Its hull was covered in scars and patches where enemy weapons had torn through metal and killed crew members. Most navies would have scrapped such an old vessel long ago. But there was still flying, still fighting, still carrying humans into the darkness between stars. Captain Park stood on the bridge and watched the tactical display fill with red dots. Each dot was a warship. She counted them slowly, carefully, the way a person might count the steps to their own grave. 43 ships, destroyers, cruisers, and one massive dreadnought that was larger than anything the Terran Republic had ever built. She was 53 years old. Her black hair had turned at the temples, and deep lines marked her face from decades of hard decisions. She had been a captain for 15 years, and before that she had served in every position a naval officer could hold. She had fought pirates, rebels, and hostile alien species. She had lost friends and crew members. She had given orders that sent people to their deaths. But she had never seen odds like this. Commander Han stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. He was her first officer, a man of 40 who had served with her for 8 years. He had a calm face that rarely showed emotion, but right now his jaw was tight and his eyes were narrow. 43 ships, he said quietly. We have one. I can count. Then you know this is suicide. Captain Park did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the bridge at her crew. Lieutenant sat at the sensor station, her fingers moving across her controls as she gathered information about the fleet. She was young, only 26, but she was one of the best sensor officers in the fleet. At the helm, Ensign waited for orders. She was even younger, just 22, fresh from the academy, but she could fly a ship better than pilots with twice her experience. These people trusted her. All 312 crew members on this ship trusted her to make the right decisions, to keep them alive, to bring them home. 12 hours ago, they had been returning from a routine patrol along the outer territories. They had been looking forward to shore leave, to seeing families, to sleeping in real beds instead of cramped ship bunks. Then they had intercepted the distress signal from Prime. Captain Park had listened to the recording 3 times. The voice belonged to someone named a planetary governor begging for help. He described the attack, the destruction, the millions of civilians with nowhere to run. His voice cracked at the end of the message, and Park could hear the sounds of explosions in the background. She had called a meeting of all senior officers. She had told them about the signal and about the fleet and about the 3 weeks it would take for any coalition forces to arrive. Then she had asked for a vote. Commander Han had voted first. He had looked at the tactical data, looked at the certain death it represented, and said 2 words: "We go." Every officer had voted the same way. Now they were here, one ship against an armada, and Captain Park had to figure out what to do next. "Captain," Lieutenant said, "they are hailing us." "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and then the face of an officer appeared. He was ugly by human standards, with skin and multiple red eyes that moved independently of each other. When he spoke, his voice was a harsh growl that the translation system turned into flat, emotionless words. "Human vessel, you have entered Dominion space. You will surrender your ship and crew immediately. If you refuse, you will be destroyed. You have 60 seconds to respond." The screen went dark. Commander Han let out a slow breath. "They are not bluffing, they never bluff." "I know. We could leave, turn around, report what we found, let the proper authorities handle it." Captain Park thought about that option. It was the smart choice. It was the choice that would keep her crew alive. It was the choice that any reasonable commander would make. But somewhere down on that planet, millions of people were going to die. They had sent a message into the void begging someone to help them, and they had heard that message. What kind of humans would they be if they just flew away? Captain Park said, "Open a channel to the..." "Channel open, Captain." Park straightened her uniform and stared at the screen. "Vessel, this is Captain Park of the Terran Republic ship. We have received your demand for surrender." She paused and let the silence stretch for a moment. "We decline." She made a cutting gesture and closed the channel. Commander Han stared at her. "What are you doing?" "My job." She pressed a button on her chair and spoke into the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage a hostile fleet that outnumbers us 43 to 1. I will not lie to you. Our chances of survival are very small, but there are 8 million civilians on the planet below us and no one else is coming to help them. If we run away, they will all die." She paused and took a breath. "I am asking you to fight. I am asking you to stand with me. I am asking you to show this galaxy what humans are made of. Battle stations." Throughout the ship, alarms began to sound. Crew members ran to their positions. Weapons systems came online. Shields activated. The old ship and patched and held together by determination as much as metal prepared for war. On the bridge, Ensign looked up from her console. Her hands were steady on the controls, even though her heart was pounding. "Captain," she said, "where do you want me to take us?" Park pointed at the cluster of red dots on the tactical display, at the 43 ships that stood between them and the planet. Through them, War Admiral watched the single human ship on his tactical display and laughed. The sound was deep and cruel, and his officers joined in nervously. One ship. One tiny, outdated human cruiser had refused to surrender to his fleet. It was the most ridiculous thing he had seen in his entire career. "These humans are either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Send 5 destroyers to eliminate them. I want this finished quickly." 5 destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward the... Each destroyer was fast and deadly, armed with plasma cannons and missile launchers. Together, they had enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Against one old cruiser, it should have been like crushing an insect. On the bridge of the lieutenant called out the contact. 5 ships incoming, Captain. They will be in weapons range in 4 minutes. Captain Park nodded calmly. "Ensign, do you see them?" His eyes were fixed on her helm controls. Her fingers danced across the console, already planning her moves. "I see them, Captain." "Show me what you can do." Smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to do something impossible. The 5 destroyers came in fast, spreading out to surround the human ship. It was standard tactics. Surround the enemy, overwhelm them with firepower from all directions, destroy them before they could respond. It had worked against every species they had ever fought. They did not wait to be surrounded. Ensign pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. The old ship screamed forward, accelerating so fast that the internal gravity systems struggled to compensate. On the bridge, crew members grabbed their consoles to stay upright. Captain Park gripped her chair and said nothing. The shot straight at the center destroyer, closing the distance in seconds. The captain barely had time to shout an order before the human ship was on top of him. Rolled the at the last possible moment, sliding beneath the destroyer so close that they almost touched. As they passed, the weapons crews fired everything they had into the destroyer's unshielded belly. The ship exploded. Before the other destroyers could react, was already moving. She spun the around in a turn that should have torn the ship apart. In the weapons bay, Chief Petty Officer shouted orders to his gun crews. Plasma cannons and fired in precise sequences, each shot timed to hit exactly when and where it would cause the most damage. A second destroyer died. Then a third. The remaining 2 ships tried to retreat, but was faster. She hunted them down like a predator chasing wounded prey. The 4th ship took a round through its reactor and vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. The 5th tried to surrender, broadcasting distress signals and powering down its weapons. Captain Park's voice was cold. They did not offer surrender to the... Chief fired the killing shot. The entire battle had lasted 11 minutes. 5 destroyers gone. They had taken only minor damage. On his flagship, War Admiral stopped laughing. He stared at the tactical display at the 5 missing ships and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Confusion. How had one old human cruiser destroyed 5 of his warships? It was impossible. It should not have happened. "Send more ships," he growled. 10 this time. I want that cruiser dead." The battle continued. 10 ships engaged and this time the human ship could not avoid taking serious damage. A plasma blast tore through the port side, venting atmosphere and killing 12 crew members instantly. Another hit destroyed one of the main engines. Fire broke out in 3 compartments. But they kept fighting. Senior Chief Moon led the damage control teams. He was a big man with thick arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had served on for 20 years, and he knew every pipe, every wire, every bolt in the old ship. When the fires started, he was already moving. "Get foam on that fire," he shouted. "Seal compartment 7, someone get me a welding torch, we have a hull breach." His teams worked with desperate speed. They sealed breaches with emergency patches. They fought fires with foam and water. They pulled wounded crew members to safety and dragged the dead aside to be dealt with later. The ship shook and screamed around them, but they did not stop. In the medical bay, Dr. Shin performed surgery while the deck pitched beneath her feet. A young crew member lay on her table, his stomach torn open by shrapnel. She worked with steady hands, ignoring the chaos around her, focused only on saving the life in front of her. "I need more blood," she called out. "Someone get me O-negative right now." Her nurses scrambled to obey. On the bridge, Captain Park watched the tactical display and made calculations in her head. They had destroyed 7 of the 10 ships, but 3 more were still firing. They was hurt badly. They could not survive much more. "Ensign," she said, "can you get us through their formation?" Looked at her console. Alarms were flashing everywhere. The ship was wounded, slow, struggling to respond, but it was still flying. "I can try, Captain." "Do not try, do it." Nodded and pushed the damaged ship forward. They charged at the formation like a wounded animal that refused to die. Weapons fired in all directions. Explosions lit up the void. 2 more ships died than the last one. But more were coming. War Admiral had finally realized that this human ship was not a joke. He was sending his entire fleet. Captain Park looked at the wave of red dots approaching on the display. 20 ships, 30 more. "How long until we reach the planet?" she asked. 20 minutes, Commander Han answered. "If we survive that long." "Then we survive that long." They flew on, bleeding and burning, fighting every meter of the way. And behind it, the fleet followed like a storm of death and fire. They reached Prime, but it was not the same ship that had entered the system hours before. The port side was a ruin of twisted metal and emergency patches. One engine was completely destroyed, and the second was failing. Half the weapons were offline. Fires still burned in 3 compartments despite everything the damage control teams had done. The ship moved slowly now, limping through space like a wounded soldier who refused to fall. 61 crew members were dead. Their bodies had been moved to a storage bay because there was no time for proper ceremonies. Another 40 were wounded, filling the medical bay and the corridors outside it. Dr. Shin had not stopped working for 8 hours. Her hands were steady, but her face was pale with exhaustion. On the bridge, Captain Park sat in her command chair and refused to show how tired she was. Her uniform was torn and stained with smoke. A cut on her forehead had stopped bleeding hours ago, but she had not taken time to clean it. She looked at the tactical display and saw what she had accomplished. They had destroyed 14 warships. 14. One old cruiser had killed more enemy vessels than some entire fleets managed in full-scale wars. The formation was in chaos, their ships scattered, their commanders confused and angry. And there was now between them and Prime. Commander Han stood beside her, his own uniform as damaged as hers. The cut on his head had been bandaged by a medic who did not have time to do a proper job. Blood had soaked through the white fabric and dried into a brown stain. "We made it," he said quietly. "We did. Now what?" Captain Park studied the display. The fleet was regrouping. They still had 29 ships, more than enough to destroy and continue their invasion. The only question was how long it would take them to attack again. "Now we hold," she said. "We cannot survive another assault. The ship is barely functional." "I know. Then what is the point?" Park turned to look at him. Her eyes were tired but not defeated. "The point is that every hour we hold, the coalition fleet gets closer. Every day we survive, more help might arrive. and every moment they spend dealing with us is a moment they are not killing civilians. She pressed the communication button on her chair. Lieutenant, open a channel to the planet. Channel open, Captain. Prime, this is Captain Park of the Terran Republic ship. We are positioning ourselves between your planet and the fleet. We will hold this position as long as possible. I recommend you evacuate civilians to the deepest shelters you have and prepare for continued orbital strikes. Do you copy? There was a long pause, and then a voice came through. It was tired and broken, but there was something like hope in it that had not been there before. This is Governor of Prime, we copy. Another pause. Captain, may I ask why you have come? You are humans. We are not your people. This is not your fight. Park thought about how to answer that question. She thought about the vote her officers had taken, the choice they had made to fly into certain death. She thought about the 61 crew members who had already given their lives. Governor, she said finally, when we received your distress signal, we could have ignored it. We could have kept flying and let someone else deal with it. But that is not who we are. When people need help, we help them. That is what humans do. Down on the planet, in the bunker deep beneath the burning capital, listened to those words and felt tears forming in his silver eyes. He had lived for 200 years. He had served his people through peace and war. He had thought he understood the galaxy and the species that lived in it. He had not understood humans at all. In the refugee shelter, word spread quickly about the ship that had arrived from nowhere. Sola heard the news from a crying woman who could not believe it was real. A human ship had come. A single human ship was fighting the entire fleet, buying time for Prime. Sola looked down at her brother, was still alive but only barely. His breath came in short gasps and his skin had turned almost white. He did not have much time left. Did you hear that? She whispered to him. Someone actually came to help us. His eyes opened slightly. Humans. Yes, humans. A small smile crossed his cracked lips. I want to meet them someday. You will, Sola said, even though she was not sure it was true. You will. In orbit, War Admiral stared at the human ship on his display. It was positioning itself directly in the path of any attack on the planet. The humans had to know they were dead. One more assault would finish them, yet they were not running. They were not trying to escape. They were standing their ground like a wall of flesh and metal, daring him to come and break them. Had conquered 17 worlds. He had crushed species that were older and stronger than humans. He had never hesitated, never doubted, never felt anything but confidence in his own superiority. Now, looking at that broken human ship that refused to die, he felt something strange. It was not fear exactly. It was more like uncertainty. These humans did not fight like any species he had ever encountered. They did not calculate odds or measure costs. They simply fought until they could not fight anymore. What kind of creatures did that? War Admiral, one of his officers said, our ships are ready for the final assault. We can destroy the human cruiser and begin the ground invasion within the hour. Was silent for a long moment, then he nodded. Give the order, all ships advance. The fleet began to move toward like a wave of death. 29 warships against one crippled cruiser. The end was coming. On the bridge of the Captain Park watched them approach and felt no fear. She felt only a strange kind of peace. She had done everything she could. Her crew had done everything they could. If this was the end, it was a good end. All hands, she said over the ship-wide channel. This is the captain. They are coming. We will hold as long as we can. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I am proud to serve with you, every single one of you. She released the button and turned to Commander Han. Let us show them how humans die. Han nodded grimly and drew his sidearm, even though it would be useless in ship-to-ship combat. It was a gesture, nothing more, a symbol of defiance. Ready when you are, Captain. The fleet closed in, weapons charged. The final battle was about to begin. And then Lieutenant shouted something that made everyone on the bridge freeze. Captain, I am detecting new contacts. Ships dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. Park spun toward her. Reinforcements. His eyes went wide. Her voice cracked with emotion. No, Captain, they are human. It is the 7th Fleet. 47 warships of the Terran Republic Navy dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They appeared in flashes of light at the edge of the system, their weapons already charged and their shields at full power. At the center of the formation was the battleship, the largest and most powerful vessel in the human fleet. It was 4 times the size of the and carried enough firepower to destroy a planet. On the bridge of the, Admiral No stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was 60 years old, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen too much war. He had received this automated position beacon 18 hours ago and had pushed his fleet beyond all safety limits to get here. Now, looking at the tactical display, he understood what Captain Park and her crew had done. 14 ships destroyed, the enemy fleet thrown into chaos, a single old cruiser holding the line between a hostile armada and a defenseless planet. "My God," he whispered. His tactical officer looked up from her console. "Admiral, the fleet is changing course. They are breaking off their attack on the—" "Of course they are." War Admiral was many things, but he was not stupid. Moments ago, he had been about to destroy one crippled cruiser and conquer a helpless world. Now he faced a fresh human battle fleet that outnumbered his damaged force. The mathematics had changed completely. On his bridge, stared at the new contacts and felt something he had not experienced in decades of war. Defeat. He could fight this human fleet, but he would lose. His ships were damaged, his crews were shaken, and the humans had brought overwhelming force. "War Admiral," his tactical officer said nervously, "what are your orders?" Was silent for a long moment. He thought about all the worlds he had conquered, all the species he had crushed beneath his fleet. He had never retreated. He had never run from a fight. But he had also never faced humans before. "Order all ships to fall back," he said finally. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. "We are leaving." "Leaving, War Admiral." "You heard me. Get us out of this system before the humans decide to finish what that cruiser started." The fleet turned and fled into faster-than-light travel. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind only the debris of the ships they had lost and the planet they had failed to conquer. On Prime, Governor watched the signatures vanish from his display. Around him, his staff began to cry and laugh and hug each other. The nightmare was over. They were going to live. Could not speak. He could only stare at the single dot on his screen that marked the human ship, the broken cruiser that had stood alone against impossible odds. In the refugee shelter, the announcement came over the speakers. They were retreating. The humans had won. The war was over. Sola heard the words and felt tears streaming down her face. She looked down at her brother and saw that he was still breathing. He was still alive. She said, shaking him gently, "Wake up, we are safe. The humans saved us." His eyes opened slowly. He was too weak to speak, but he smiled. In orbit, the pulled alongside the Admiral No looked at the damage and shook his head slowly. The ship was a wreck. He did not understand how it was still in one piece, let alone still operational. "Open a channel to the," he ordered. A moment later, Captain Park's face appeared on his screen. She looked exhausted beyond words, her uniform torn and bloody, her face covered in smoke and grime. But her eyes were clear and proud. "Admiral," she said, her voice hoarse. "Captain Park," he paused, struggling to find the right words. "What the hell were you thinking?" She almost smiled. "I was thinking that someone needed help, Admiral, and we were there." "You could have been killed. Your entire crew could have been killed." "Yes, sir, we knew that." "Then why?" Park was quiet for a moment. She looked around her damaged bridge, at the tired faces of her surviving crew members. She thought about the 61 people who had died, the friends and comrades she would never see again. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said simply. "Because that is who we are." Admiral No had no response to that. He just nodded slowly and ordered his ships to begin rescue and repair operations. 3 weeks later, a memorial was built in the capital city of Prime. The crystal towers were being rebuilt, the fires were out, and the people were beginning to heal. But they would never forget what had happened or who had saved them. The memorial was a wall of black stone, polished smooth as glass. 61 names were carved into it, one for each human crew member who had died defending a world that was not their own. Captain Park stood before the memorial with the survivors of her crew. They wore their dress uniforms, cleaned and pressed, though many of them were still healing from their wounds. Behind them stood Governor and thousands of citizens who had come to honor the humans who had given their lives. A young woman approached Captain Park. It was Sola, and beside her, walking with a cane, was her brother. He was thin and weak, but he was alive. The human doctors from the 7th Fleet had saved his leg and his life. "Captain," Sola said, her voice trembling, "I do not know how to thank you. You saved my brother. You saved all of us." Park looked at the young woman and her brother. She thought about why she had made the choice to fight, why her crew had voted to fly into certain death. "You do not need to thank us," she said. "Just live well, that is enough." Governor stepped forward. He had prepared a speech, written words that tried to express what they felt. But now, standing before this woman who had risked everything for his people, he found that he could only ask the question that had haunted him since that desperate night. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you come? We were strangers to you. We had nothing to offer. You could have died, and many of your people did die. Why would you do this for us?" Captain Park looked at the memorial wall, at the names of her crew members who would never go home. She thought about Commander Han, who had voted first. She thought about Ensign, who had flown the ship through impossible maneuvers. She thought about Senior Chief Moon and Dr. Shin and all the others who had fought and bled and died. "Because that is what humans do," she said. "When someone needs help, we show up. When darkness comes, we stand against it. We do not ask what we will gain or what it will cost. We simply do what is right." She turned to face the thousands of gathered behind her. "Wherever you are in this galaxy, if you are in trouble, if you are afraid, if you think that no one is coming to help you, remember this day. Remember what happened here. Humans do not abandon people in need. No matter how far away you are, no matter how impossible the odds, we will come." She paused and looked up at the sky, at the stars that were invisible in the daylight but always there. That is what humanity means. Across the galaxy, word spread about what had happened at Prime. Species who had dismissed humans as young and unimportant began to look at them differently. The Dominion, shocked by their defeat, sought peace for the first time in their history, and everywhere beings of all kinds learned a simple truth. When darkness came and hope died and no help was coming, humans appeared from the endless void. And they fought,